December the 18th, 1944, 13:47 hours. Snow-covered fields outside Malmedy, Belgium. The crisp, cold air was shattered by the roar of an engine and the sharp crack of a high-velocity gun. Inside the command cupola of a German Tiger Ischurich, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter raised his binoculars, his breath catching in his throat. What he was witnessing defied every principle of armored combat he had been taught. Through the swirling snow, he saw an American armored vehicle, low-slung and agile, materialize on his flank like a phantom. It fired 3 rapid, precisely aimed shots. The sound was still echoing when the vehicle reversed at an astonishing speed, disappearing back into the tree line from whence it came. Before Richter could even bark an order, before his gunner could begin the agonizingly slow process of traversing the massive 88mm gun turret, a sickening impact rocked the Tiger. A fireball erupted within the fighting compartment. The 56-ton behemoth, the pinnacle of German engineering and the most feared weapon on the battlefield, was now a funeral pyre in the snow. Richter and his crew, who had believed themselves invincible, never even saw what killed them. Unbeknownst to the German High Command, they were not facing a conventional tank. They were confronting a weapon born from a revolutionary doctrine that turned centuries of military wisdom on its head. While German designers and tacticians were locked in an endless cycle of building ever heavier armor and mounting ever larger guns, American engineers had pursued a different path. They had created a machine whose primary defense was not steel plate, but unparalleled velocity. A vehicle so swift it could dictate the terms of any engagement, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the enemy's cumbersome command and control cycle could even formulate a response. The M18 Hellcat was not designed to withstand a stand-up fight. It was engineered from the ground up to be a hunter. The unshakable German doctrine. The tyranny of weight and firepower. The German armored doctrine that had carved a path of destruction across Europe, from the fields of France to the steppes of Russia, was built upon a seemingly unassailable logic. Victory in armored warfare went to the vehicle with the thickest armor and the most powerful cannon. This philosophy was a product of direct experience and had proven devastatingly effective. It had given birth to the workhorse Panzer IV, the sophisticated Panther, and ultimately the near-mythical Tiger West. The Tiger was more than a tank. It was a mobile fortress. Its frontal armor was virtually impervious to the shells of most Allied tanks at standard combat ranges. Its 88mm gun, legendary for its accuracy and power, could punch through the armor of any American or British tank from distances exceeding 2,000 meters, well before those enemy vehicles could even hope to retaliate effectively. German tank crews, particularly those in the heavy panzer battalions, operated with a profound sense of superiority. They were the masters of the battlefield, and by late 1944, this confidence had calcified into a dangerous and pervasive assumption. Wehrmacht training manuals drilled a specific set of tactics into their commanders. Secure, strong defensive positions, allow the enemy armor to advance, and then destroy them with controlled, long-range volleys. This doctrine had worked against the British in the North African desert and had inflicted terrible losses on Allied forces in the close confines of Normandy's Bocage country. The German command saw no reason to deviate from a formula that had brought them so much success. Field Marshal Walter Model, the abrasive and capable commander of Army Group B during the December 1944 Ardennes offensive, had meticulously organized his panzer divisions according to these established principles. His intelligence briefings consistently downplayed the threat posed by American tank destroyers. Captured technical manuals and after-action reports from earlier battles indicated that vehicles like the M10 Wolverine were slow, poorly protected, and mounted a 3-inch gun that struggled against the frontal armor of a Panther, let alone a Tiger. Model's staff had calculated with cold, mathematical certainty that German armor would engage and obliterate American forces at ranges where return fire would be nothing more than a nuisance. What German intelligence had catastrophically failed to identify was a fundamental and radical shift in American armored warfare theory. a shift that had been gestating since the hard lessons of the North African campaign at Kasserine Pass, the American counter-thesis, the revolution of mobility. After years of analyzing tank battles from the disasters of Tunisia to the brutal stalemate in the Norman hedgerows, a group of forward-thinking American officers arrived at a heretical conclusion. In the fluid, chaotic environment of modern mechanized warfare, strategic mobility could be a far more valuable asset than passive armor protection. This concept ran counter to all conventional military thought. Since the first British Mark I tanks had crawled across the mud of the Somme in 1916, the central trinity of tank design had been armor, firepower, and mobility, almost always in that order. The Americans were now proposing to flip this hierarchy on its head, deliberately accepting vulnerability in exchange for a speed so great it would prevent the enemy from ever getting a clear shot. The chief architect of this revolution was Colonel Andrew Bruce, the commanding officer of the Tank Destroyer Center at Camp Hood, Texas. Since 1942, Bruce had pored over countless combat reports and identified a critical, recurring pattern. Traditional tank destroyers like the M10 rarely survived prolonged slugging matches with German heavies. The M10, with its adequate 3-inch gun and a top speed of barely 30 miles per hour, was simply too slow to seize fleeting opportunities or to extricate itself from a losing engagement. Bruce argued that what was truly needed was not a slightly better M10, but a completely new kind of vehicle. A machine that could race to firing positions faster than enemy gunners could traverse their turrets, deliver a lethal blow, and then disappear before the first return shell could even land. The specifications Bruce submitted to the Ordnance Department in early 1943 bordered on the fantastical. He demanded a maximum speed exceeding 50 mph, a figure unheard of for a tracked fighting vehicle. It needed to carry a powerful 76mm gun capable of defeating German armor at standard combat ranges. To achieve this speed, its total weight had to be kept under 20 tons. And, in a controversial but calculated move, he specified an open-topped turret to reduce weight and, crucially, to give the crew an unparalleled level of situational awareness. The monumental task of bringing this vision to life fell to the engineers at Buick Motor Division. Their design philosophy was single-minded, speed above all else. The Hellcat's hull was constructed from thinly rolled armor plate with a maximum thickness of only 1 inch, a paltry sum compared to the Tiger's 4+ inches of hardened steel. They turned to the aviation industry, installing a massive Continental R975 radial engine that produced 450 horsepower. The transmission featured a controlled differential steering system, allowing the M18 to pivot and turn with an agility that defied its tracked nature. Every single component, from the road wheels to the gun mount, was scrutinized and lightened for maximum performance. When the first prototypes were tested at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in October 1943, the results stunned military observers. The M18 Hellcat achieved a breathtaking 55 mph on level ground, outpacing many of the Army's own wheeled trucks. It could accelerate from a dead stop to 30 mph in under 20 seconds. Its power-to-weight ratio of 22.5 horsepower per ton was more than double that of most German tanks. Most remarkably, the advanced steering system allowed the Hellcat to execute a full 360-degree turn within its own length, even while moving. Its 76-meter M1A1 gun, while less powerful than the Tiger's 88, was more than adequate when firing the latest tungsten carbide armor-piercing rounds, capable of piercing over 90 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards. Critically, the lightweight open-topped turret could traverse a full circle in under 8 seconds. A Tiger required a minute or more to accomplish the same maneuver. A well-drilled Hellcat crew could acquire a target, fire 3 aimed shots, and be racing for cover, all in under 30 seconds. By the summer of 1944, Buick's production lines were running at full capacity. The first tank destroyer battalions to receive the Hellcat underwent a radical new form of training developed by Colonel Bruce himself. The crews were taught to think not like traditional tankers, but like light cavalrymen of a bygone era. Their creed was simple: never engage an enemy frontally. Always maneuver to strike the flanks or rear, fire and move constantly, and use the terrain for concealment and mobility, not for static protection. The tactical manual for M18 operations was explicit. The Hellcat does not fight fair. It strikes from ambush, from flanks, from positions the enemy considers impossible to reach. Your survival depends on not being where the enemy expects you to be when his return fire arrives. This was a complete philosophical divorce from the German way of war. When the first Hellcat battalions landed in France in July 1944, German intelligence officers examining the wreckage of a few destroyed M18s noted the thin armor and dismissed them as just another inferior American design. Reports sent back to Wehrmacht headquarters described the M18 as lightly armored, similar to existing American tank destroyers, and posed no significant threat to panzer formations. This assessment would prove to be one of the most catastrophic intelligence failures of the Western Front. Baptism by fire. The hunter becomes the hunted. The 630th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the first American unit fully equipped with Hellcats, landed in France on August 1st. Their true test came during the closing of the Falaise Pocket in mid-August. German panzer units, desperate to break out of the Allied encirclement, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they could not pin down. American armor was appearing on their vulnerable flanks with a speed that German commanders could scarcely comprehend. In his after-action report, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis of the 630th captured the essence of the new warfare. German tanks were configured for frontal engagement. When our Hellcats appeared on their flanks at high speed, their doctrine failed them. They attempted to turn and face us, but we were already gone, repositioning for another strike. We destroyed 11 German tanks without losing a single Hellcat. However, the ultimate proving ground for the Hellcat and its revolutionary doctrine was the frozen hell of the German Ardennes offensive, launched on December 16, 1944. Field Marshal Model's ambitious battle plan, known to the Allies as the Battle of the Bulge, relied on rapid, powerful armored thrusts through the dense, hilly Ardennes forest. German planners had identified this sector as ideal for their purposes, precisely because they believed the restrictive terrain, narrow roads, thick woods, and steep valleys, was unsuitable for large-scale Allied armor operations. Model's panzer commanders expected to overrun scattered American infantry divisions that possessed only limited anti-tank capabilities. What they encountered instead was a new form of armored warfare that masterfully exploited the very terrain the Germans thought would protect them. The M18 Hellcat, with its narrow profile, lightweight, and exceptional maneuverability, thrived in conditions that immobilized and confused heavier tanks. The 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with 17 M18s, was positioned near St. Vith when the German offensive erupted. Its commander, Major Harold Williamson, understood that against the onslaught of Tigers and Panthers, establishing a static defensive line was a recipe for annihilation. Instead, he implemented the mobile defense tactics specifically designed for the Hellcat. He dispersed his battalion into small, independent platoons of 4 vehicles, assigning each a wide sector with multiple pre-scouted firing positions and carefully rehearsed withdrawal routes. The concept was lethally simple. Allow German columns to advance, observe their movement, race to an optimal ambush point, unleash a devastating volley from the flank or rear, and then displace to the next position long before the stunned enemy could organize a counterstrike. The first major engagement of this new tactic occurred on December 17th at 0630 hours. A German column of 4 Tiger I tanks and supporting grenadiers was advancing confidently along the Schönberg Road. Sergeant Robert Hayes, commanding an M18 platoon, had concealed his 4 Hellcats in a wooded copse roughly 800 meters from the road. He patiently waited, following the German standard operating procedure of having the lead tank advance while the others provided overwatch. Hayes allowed the entire column to enter the killing zone. At 0647 hours, he gave the order. All 4 Hellcats fired simultaneously. The engagement was over in 43 seconds. 4 of Germany's most powerful tanks were burning wrecks, and Hayes's platoon was already speeding towards secondary positions 2 kilometers away. When German infantry and supporting units rushed to the scene, they found only the smoldering remains of their Tigers and empty, snow-covered firing positions. This pattern repeated itself with terrifying consistency throughout December 17th. German armored columns, stretching for miles along the narrow Ardennes roads, found themselves under sudden, violent attack from directions their maps claimed were secure. They were hit by forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion alone claimed 18 German armored vehicles destroyed on that first day, at the cost of a single M18 lightly damaged by stray artillery fire. German after-action reports from that day reveal a command structure in complete disarray, struggling to comprehend a new form of warfare. One panicked panzer commander reported, "Engaged by American armor from tree line at 800 meters. Returned fire immediately, but enemy had already displaced. Pursued to last known position. Found nothing. 10 minutes later, engaged from the opposite flank. Enemy again disappeared before effective response was possible." The core of the German dilemma was a simple matter of physics and time. A Tiger, I had a maximum road speed of 24 mph. A Panther could manage 20 mph. Both required several minutes to traverse their heavy turrets and achieve a firing solution. The Hellcat could hit 50 mph on those same roads, and its turret could swing around in a fraction of the time. German crews were not just fighting a faster vehicle, they were fighting an enemy that operated inside their decision-making cycle, striking in the gap between observation and reaction. The German reckoning. Doctrine meets its obsolescence. The German command structure, built upon decades of successful, if rigid, armored doctrine, was utterly baffled by the reports flooding in from the Ardennes. Field Marshal Model's headquarters received increasingly frantic messages describing impossible scenarios. American armor appearing simultaneously in multiple locations, striking from extreme flanks, and vanishing before any coordinated counterattack could be launched. Model's initial reaction, shared by his staff, was to dismiss these as the exaggerated fantasies of panicked junior officers. By December 18th, the evidence could no longer be ignored. At 0900 hours, Model convened an emergency meeting with his senior panzer commanders at the 5th Panzer Army headquarters. Colonel Heinrich Bauer, commander of a heavy panzer battalion, presented stark evidence. Reconnaissance photographs showing distinct M18 track patterns. His analysis was chillingly accurate. These American vehicles are achieving tactical positions faster than our forces can respond, Bauer reported. Our Tigers require 5 to 7 minutes to reposition and achieve firing solutions. The American tank destroyers are completing their entire attack cycle in under 60 seconds. We are not fighting tanks, gentlemen. We are fighting cavalry mounted on tracked vehicles. The existing Wehrmacht tactical manuals for countering American armor, printed just months before, were suddenly obsolete. They dedicated only a few scant paragraphs to tank destroyers, all based on the assumption that American vehicles would eventually be drawn into a frontal assault where German superiority would tell. There were no procedures, no drills, for countering an enemy that refused direct combat and attacked only from positions of absolute advantage. In response, Model authorized immediate, desperate tactical modifications. Panzer columns were now ordered to deploy reconnaissance elements far forward and on both flanks. Supporting infantry was tasked with sweeping and securing terrain before the armor could advance. While prudent, these measures had a crippling secondary effect. They slowed the German advance to a crawl, consuming precious fuel that was already in critically short supply. More importantly, these changes were based on the flawed assumption that German forces could detect the Hellcats before an engagement, an assumption the Americans were proving false on a daily basis. American tank destroyer battalions, meanwhile, were refining their tactics into an art form. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, operating in the northern sector, perfected what they called carousel tactics. Lieutenant James Patterson documented the procedure. Position multiple Hellcats at compass points around a suspected enemy route. When the German armor entered the kill zone, they would be engaged from all directions simultaneously. The resulting confusion prevented any coordinated response, and the Hellcats would withdraw before the enemy could determine the primary axis of attack. On December 19th, Patterson's platoon executed this to perfection near Stavelot. A column of 6 Panthers and 3 Tigers entered a small valley. Within 90 seconds, all 9 German vehicles were ablaze. Radio intercepts captured the chaos. Under attack from all sides. Cannot identify enemy positions. Require immediate support. By the time German reinforcements arrived, Patterson's Hellcats were already 7 kilometers away, regrouping at a pre-planned assembly area. The psychological toll on the German crews was immense. These were veterans who had dominated battlefields for years, but now they were being hunted by an invisible, unpredictable foe. Morale began to crack. Crews reported phantom Hellcat sightings. Entire units would halt their advance for hours to search for non-existent ambushes, completely disrupting Model's meticulously planned offensive timetable. A captured German tactical bulletin from December 21st laid bare the doctrinal crisis. American M18 tank destroyers operate outside conventional armored engagement parameters. Standard counter-armor procedures are ineffective. Units encountering M18s should request air support and withdraw to defensive positions. This was an unthinkable admission, a directive for the mighty Tiger to retreat from a vehicle with 1/4 of its armor. The dynamic of the battlefield had fundamentally shifted. As Staff Sergeant Lawrence Mitchell of the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion aptly put it, "Early in the war, we ran from Tigers. By December 44, they were running from us. Not because we had better armor or bigger guns, we were just faster than they could think." The widening gyre, American innovation and German desperation. The American tactical playbook continued to evolve with breathtaking speed. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, fighting in the critical Bastogne corridor, pioneered Thunder Run tactics, deep penetration raids into the German rear areas. Captain Theodore Walsh of the 704th explained the logic. "We realized the Hellcat's speed allowed us to reach areas the Germans considered secure. Their rear echelon units, supply depots, command posts, fuel dumps, had minimal anti-armor capability. We could penetrate 15 kilometers behind their lines, create absolute havoc, and extract before they could organize any kind of response." On December 23rd, Walsh's company executed the first documented Thunder Run. 6 Hellcats, navigating forest tracks marked impassable on German maps, struck a major fuel depot near Houffalize. In a 7-minute whirlwind of destruction, they destroyed 19 fuel trucks and 2 ammunition carriers before racing back to American lines without a single casualty. The psychological impact of these raids was disproportionate to their material damage. German logistics commanders, terrified of these deep-striking ghosts, began demanding armored escorts for their supply convoys. This forced the diversion of precious Panthers and Tigers from the front lines to guard duty, a complete perversion of their intended offensive role. Radio intercepts documented the growing paranoia. American armor reported at Houffalize. Request immediate verification. Sector considered beyond enemy capability. Another message stated, "Supply convoy refuses to move without armored escort. Claim American tank destroyers operating in rear areas." The 610th Tank Destroyer Battalion developed another innovative approach: Wolfpack operations. Instead of operating in fixed platoons, they dispersed individual Hellcats across a wide front, all coordinated by a precise timetable. The concept, as outlined by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Harrison, was to create a simultaneous, distributed attack that would convince the enemy they were facing an entire armored division. On December 26th, 23 M18s from the 610th attacked German positions across a 15-kilometer front at precisely 1400 hours. The Germans were utterly confused, reporting attacks by a massive force when, in reality, they were facing 24 independently operating vehicles with perfect synchronization. The Germans scrambled for countermeasures, but each was rendered ineffective by the Hellcat's inherent mobility. Ambushes set along likely routes were bypassed using alternate trails. German tank hunting detachments, equipped with their own slower tank destroyers, could not catch the M18s. Requests for Luftwaffe air support were futile against the winter clouds and overwhelming Allied air superiority. Driven to desperation, the 116th Panzer Division attempted to create fast reaction forces using their quickest vehicles, Panzerwehrforce and Stu-G3 assault guns. The theory was sound. Race to the site of a Hellcat sighting and engage them before they could escape. Its practical application on December 27th was a disaster. A German mobile force of 8 Panzerwehrforce, rushing to engage 2 visible Hellcats, was lured into a classic ambush. 6 concealed M18s opened fire, destroying all 8 German vehicles in under 3 minutes. The 2 bait Hellcats never fired a shot. The Germans were not just being outfought, they were being outthought. The legacy of speed, an enduring doctrine. The Battle of the Bulge officially concluded on January 25, 1945, with German forces forced back to their starting lines. While its failure was the result of a complex interplay of factors, critical fuel shortages, tenacious American infantry resistance, improving weather that unleashed Allied air power, the role of the M18 Hellcat was tactically decisive. The official statistics from the Ardennes campaign are telling. Total Hellcats deployed. 312 German armored vehicles confirmed destroyed. 526 tanks and assault guns. American M18 losses, 42, with 31 of those recovered and returned to service. This represents a kill ratio exceeding 5-to-1, a staggering achievement against the best armor and crews Germany could field. It was a resounding validation of Colonel Bruce's revolutionary premise. Post-war interrogations of German commanders reveal the depth of the Hellcat's impact. General Otto Remmer, commander of the Führerbegleit Brigade, testified, "The American fast tank destroyers changed everything. We could not defend against weapons that appeared faster than we could respond. Our tactical doctrine assumed we could control engagement ranges. These vehicles controlled engagement timing instead." Colonel Hans von Luck, operations officer for the 116th Panzer Division, provided a more detailed autopsy. German armored doctrine emphasized frontal protection and direct fire superiority. The Americans built a weapon that refused to fight on our terms. We were fighting the next generation of armored warfare while still practicing the last generation's tactics. The lessons learned from the Hellcat's success resonated for decades, fundamentally influencing U.S. military doctrine. The post-war conclusion was clear. In fluid battlefields, speed and tactical flexibility could trump brute strength and armor. This philosophy can be traced through subsequent vehicle designs like the M551 Sheridan and the M1128 mobile gun system. The human cost, however, was borne by the young crews who operated these speed traps. The thin armor and open turret that granted them their edge also made them terribly vulnerable. They lived with the constant, nerve-shredding knowledge that survival depended not on armor, but on the driver's foot and the commander's quick judgment. As Corporal James Henderson of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion recalled, "You knew one good hit would kill you. The only protection was not being there when the shell arrived. Every engagement was a race. The stress was constant." The final, most eloquent assessment came from General George S. Patton. In his report to General Eisenhower, he wrote, "The M18 tank destroyer proved itself the most effective American armored vehicle in the European theater. Its ability to appear where needed, strike decisively, and withdraw before enemy response saved countless American lives and destroyed German armored capability. Speed, properly employed, defeats armor." Those 8 words, speed properly employed defeats armor, encapsulate the entire Hellcat story. The German Tiger was a masterpiece of power and protection. The American Hellcat was a masterpiece of agility and concept. In the snows of the Ardennes, the latter proved superior. The M18 Hellcat stands as an enduring testament to a fundamental truth of modern combat. Victory does not always go to the strongest, but to the swiftest, the smartest, and the most adaptable. The German commanders who watched their invincible Tigers burn learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible. The American crews who drove their Hellcats into legend proved that on the battlefield, the fastest gun wins.